Ron.
Yeah, great talk. I just want to go a bit back to your the start of your talk, because when you say, okay, you have this paper where you say, okay, if you get more better infrastructure between cities, right, the structures of cities become more similar. But how do you reconcile that with your finding of your scaling laws, right, in which it's actually you see a more spatial concentration of especially the more complex activities in a few cities? And those cities are probably the most connected by good infrastructure. So
Yeah.
how do you reconcile those findings?
No, yeah, it's interesting. Like, it's something that definitely I should give more thought to. But if you look at the connections of the large cities, a lot of the connections between the large cities also include not only local connections, but faraway connections to other large cities. So, for example, Boston and San Francisco are much more connected than, let's say, San Francisco and Reno, Nevada. You know, in terms, you know, of flow of people and people that participate in both innovation and industrial ecosystems.
Yeah.
So in that context, when we talk about like big cities, there might be kind of like a very hierarchical network in which big cities are connected in this core, you know, through plane and through other type of, you know, transportation technologies and communication technologies that don't correspond that much with space. Yeah, but. Yeah.
Okay, and another question I had about your law on diffusion of knowledge. I mean, one of the big things about knowledge is who owns the knowledge, right? And so ownership of knowledge is something which we do not really take into account that much, right? So we just look at to what extent knowledge will diffuse over space and over time, but not who actually owns it. And the reason why I ask is because we now live in a world of globalization, a world multinational corporations are really a major driving force of that. And if multinationals just decide to locate somewhere or relocate their activities, you might, that might show up in your data as an entry. And that might be quite unrelated to what is happening in that particular host region. So all I'm saying is that, yeah, you might see a diffusion of knowledge, but the ownership of knowledge will remain in just a few hands and in just a few companies worldwide. So the diffusion of knowledge is actually observed, but the ownership of knowledge becomes remains fully concentrated in just a few companies.
Yeah, and that's correct. Like in the case of Brazil, we were able to observe, because of the granularity of the data, differences between pioneer events that were branches and pioneer events that were fully new companies.
Right.
In the paper, we actually focus only on the ones that are fully new companies. And in the case of Brazil, there wasn't that much of that branching, you know. And also the coefficients, we found, you know, this is all more appendix material, you know, that were the same if it was like a branch or if it was, you know, like a new firm, you know. But in other settings, you know, I would say in a more global context, definitely like that ownership of knowledge, you know, it's important. At the same time, one way in which knowledge diffuses is, you know, through this offshore and outsourcing, and that's why, you know, a lot of countries search for that FDI. Now, how effective is that FDI for knowledge diffusion vis-a-vis, you know, homegrown innovation and development? I think it's less effective. Nevertheless, it is one of the many mechanisms that people search for.
We did just a paper on Hungary, and we could indeed, because a lot of foreign direct investment went to that country after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And what we actually show is that indeed those multinational corporations can really deviate from what the activities that you have already present, because their ownership is somewhere else, right? So they don't have to rely on the local environment when they invest in those host regions.
Yeah.
But they can just rely on internal flows within the multinational corporations that are located elsewhere, and they just make the knowledge from the headquarters to those subsidiaries in those host regions.
And then the question is like whether they generate future spillover, because, for example, in the case of Intel moving to Costa Rica, there was almost no spillover.
No,
they were kind of like a separate compound.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but you still observe unrelated diversification, but indeed the local spillovers might be less because it's so distant from the local activities, right?
Yeah, I know the OECD is very interested on kind of like the link between relatedness and FDI, you know, and they've been trying to move in that direction to try to understand, you know, because of course, you know, one thing is to get the investment, another thing is like, you know, what are all of the other things that come with investment and where would be the best place to have it. Yes.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I really admire the clarity that you bring to complex matters. I have a question about the applied part of your presentation, where you explain how you make data easily accessible. But it made me wonder, in the earlier part of your presentation, you also talk about knowledge intensity and economic complexity.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges that I see is that if you use that apparently as an important measure, do you also offer that as part of your applied environment? Do you, in other words, not only offer data, but also offer, let's say, pre-calculated measures that others can leverage then in their research? So it's one thing to offer the data, and then you need to calculate, like, I don't know, knowledge intensity of a certain city on your own behalf. But you could also extend your environment with offering that calculation already. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you do that? Or?
Yeah, so like, and all of the different products that we do have like sometimes different editorial lines and we pivot over time. So for example, in the OEC, we provide the numbers. Now, like we want to move to a more professionalized version in which we would provide the ability to calculate. So they will say like, hey, I want to calculate ECI, I want to do it with countries over this size in terms of population, over this size in terms of exports, products that are exported, and then you would get everything done on the fly for you. You know, you could put it into regressions, and we want to go more into this tool type of world. In Data USA, we haven't included all of this relatedness analysis or anything, in part because every time we do like the punch list of what we're going to do next, you know, like we usually select 3 things, and that is always number 4. You know, so then, you know, because then we have also like a more stakeholders working on it. In other places, for instance, I was recently with the people in the new government in Mexico. You know, they opened an economic complexity department within the Ministry of Economy. You know, and they're very interested in building a data Mexico, and including many of these ideas and tools within, you know, that platform as well. So it varies a lot based on the editorial line that we follow in each one of the projects. In Data Chile, we have the product space, but we don't have measures of knowledge intensity of the locations.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The reason I asked, I think, is what you said is that, for instance, at the moment, the Italian Ministry of Finance, which are under quite some pressure now because of the EU not agreeing with their economic policies, but they're also looking at economic complexity. So I think it would be a big advantage if, for instance, within the European Union, not every country starts to calculate measures and then starts debating forever how you should calculate those measures, but there is a sort of common way or common offering that you can use to have a more consistent way of calculating measures.
No, yeah, I agree, and that's part of the direction in which I think we're trying to go. You know, in the case of the EU, we could do it subnationally, you know, if we would do like a data Europe based on the NATS data and the industry data, employment data, export data. Yeah. Thanks.
I have like a more societal or policy-related question. You mentioned a fascinating result about how large cities exponentially increase their knowledge production. And you mentioned that policy-wise, policies should be targeted towards including all people living in cities to profit from this exponential knowledge growth, and not try to create a knowledge cluster or a large knowledge base in every small town. But I think that makes sense. Is it not terrible news for people living in small towns or in rural areas, also given your results on income inequality as a function of economic complexity?
Yeah, I think it's bad news, and it's tough. Like in some way, like one of the big problems of politics, you know, is that politics is tied to geography very, 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 very closely. Yeah. So if I'm the representative of this little patch of land and these people, I don't want to bring this investment or this project here because this is the best place for that project. I want to bring this project here, even if it's the worst place for that project, because I'm a representative of here. You know, so there's a lot of misallocation that happens because of that strong geographic nature of politics. You know, that in some sense now it's even more and at odds with the reality of the economy. Because the economy, as it becoming more knowledge intense, what this is saying is, instead of in the UK trying to develop every little town that was left behind, which is politically now very much, radicalized, maybe because they haven't been having the growth or the experience that they expected, would be to like, how do we make London a 20 million people city instead of an 8 million people city, and include, those other 12 millions, into the knowledge hub that we have that can actually generate growth, and that's a really hard pill to swallow, because of course the people that is in a small town maybe don't want to move to London, maybe their kids might want to migrate, because usually the young people that are born in these places with less opportunities tend to, more likely be migrants, especially if they study and they acquire knowledge and so forth, But at the moment, for example, in the EU, I don't see that there's any effort to kind of like create more of like those large, 20 million people cities in any place, as I see, for example, in places like China, where a lot of the development has happened by the creation of mega cities in places where the cities were originally like small or almost inexistent, like in Shenzhen or Zhengzhou, which were like relatively small locations, and they have included a lot of people, and that's how they have generated that inclusion and growth. Yeah. So it's easier to move people to the knowledge than knowledge to the people. That's sort of like the way that at least the natural science appears to work. Yeah.
But do you need one big megacity? I mean, if you have Utrecht and Amsterdam being close together, or if you have the Ruhr area in Germany, where you have a lot of, 1 million cities close together, which are closely related by trains, could that also work? I mean, to have clusters of medium cities instead of megacities?
Yeah, so of course you don't need like one megacity for the entire world. You have like different like knowledge hubs, and you can have multiple of them, and you might be able to find other ways of having those like that urban design in which you have a lot of little cities, like for example in the south of Germany, in Swabia, you do have a lot of like 10, 12,000 people towns that they add up to considerable population when you put them together, and they're quite interconnected, like around Stuttgart, So the population of each location is small, but the population of the group tends to be relatively large, and it tends to be like a knowledge intense cluster as well. So I do think that there might be other solutions that sometimes have emerged in those type of knowledge clusters, but I would say the most common one going forward probably is going to be quite more urban, Yeah, because at the end of the day, like cities are super linear in terms of productivity, and they're sublinear in terms of cost. So also, cities are the most sustainable solution, in terms of like water usage, energy usage, garbage production, all those things. People in cities produce way less than when you give people, more space and less density. Yeah. So for sustainability, also cities are important. Yeah.
Yes. On your data project, do you pre-select? Question would be, how do you select on which data you make available? And I'm asking because here in the Netherlands we have this Bureau of Statistics, who annually make up a publication on broad welfare, and they have this specific method of selecting, let's say, data on natural capital, for example, social capital, but also some of these more other than stock data, also flow data. So this is pretty specific on what data they use for that analysis. So how does that work with yours? Is it just as much data as you can get? Or?
No, because there's always more data than the one that we're going to include. So we try to go through both sides, Like on the one hand, we try to find things that we think are relevant and important, So for example, in the US, the ACS, which is the American Community Survey, which is the long form of the census, it goes to very deep spatial resolution on the way to census tract. It has a lot of variables, so it's a really important data set that is relevant for many different people, and therefore we want to include it. On that hand, sometimes we also like use a criteria that is much more pedestrian, but I think when you build technology, you have to use it, which is, well, is the data clean, available, updated, all of that stuff, because in some sense, if you only focus on the data that you wish you had, a lot of times the data you wish you had is not there. So sometimes it's like, hey, what is the data that is out there? And let's build the cake with whatever flour, eggs, and butter we have, instead of, with the unicorn flour that we wish we had. So like we try to do both, Which are the things that we would want, which are the things that are easy to get and, would be relatively low cost, what's the intersection of that, that's the sweet spot, and then from there, you know, as resources allow, try to include more. Yeah. Yeah. Many questions now. Kachipun, yeah. No, you already asked one question. Yeah, so the guy behind you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a short one. With great power comes great responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So have you thought about this? Because by providing this as data access and analytical tools, you basically lower the entrance barriers to precisely these type of analysis. And the analysis you showed, you said yourself, please don't interpret this as a kind of scientific, really in-depth study. However, you provide the tools for people that can actually do now this type of studies in a at least visually appealing and sophisticated appealing, or looks like sophisticated analysis. But of course, they might lack all the knowledge behind that in order to carefully interpret that. So have you like thought about that? So this might be like the...
Yeah, of course I thought about that. Yeah, so the question is like, how much on the one hand the tools help you like learn, help these people learn, and on the other hand, whether, you know, that ill is already happening. And when I look at Facebook and I look at, you know, like the things that people are sharing, it's not, you know, that they're doing that by running regressions and trying to do analysis. And so I think if someone is kind of like trying to run a regression, probably it's on the bias of trying to really understand something a little bit more, even if they might not be that prepared. Because people are basically putting memes and trying to use more artistic means of knowledge and information diffusion to misinform others than statistical methods and means. So I think on the net, you know, what we believe, you know, might be happening is that actually the learning becomes like positive because you get to a world in which more people have access to the tools, and when you have more access to the tools, you have more ability to learn from them. At the moment, I think we live still in a world that the oral culture is extremely rampant, you know, like some sort of form of oral culture, especially in the misinformation spheres of social media, you know. And in that context, you know, we hope that this will help bring more people to, oh, actually, you can look at how one variable depends on two others. That for a lot of people outside of the university would be news, you know. If we can get more people to understand that, I think, you know, we're helping move the needle in the right direction, you know. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Me?
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, super quick. Talking about your last slide and AI application to the public sector, how long do you realistically think, in terms of years, will that take for government to be ready to do that?
In developing countries, way fewer years than in developed countries.
Okay.
Yeah, because like in some sense they move faster, you know, and they're more innovative. So like if you want to innovate in government, you know, go to Dubai, you know, go to Latin America, go to China, go to Africa, you know, don't come to Europe. You know? Yeah, exactly. You know? you see, the Eurostat is your data USA right now. You know, you guys have suffered Eurostat sometimes? I've suffered Eurostat a little bit. Yeah? You know? So like in that case, I do think that in many of those places, if you go to Dubai, they have a Minister of AI, and they organize the World Government Summit, which is all about technology in government every year. So I think there are parts of the world that are much more into going in those directions, especially like places that I think have a bit more of like, I don't want to use the word authoritarian, because in authoritarian Trump style and authoritarian when it's kind of like more institutionalized and expected, I find it very different. So like in a place that you have like a kingdom, like in, you know, in the Emirates or in Saudi Arabia or something like that, sometimes they move fast in this type of technocratic directions, you know, because they can. In China also they can move very fast in terms of technocracy in ways that in Europe and the US they cannot. In Latin America it fluctuates because it depends on like having the right champion in the right ministry at the right time, being the friend of the right, you know, guy that's gonna be able to approve the stuff, you know. So you have like windows of development that happen there, you know. But I do think that in many places is starting to happen, you know. And in the places starting to happen are the places where the Western news sources also have not that much an understanding or knowledge about. So there's a lot of stuff that we might be missing. But I do think that more and more this is a little bit part of like the conversation. And for example, I'm going to Davos on January, you know, and a lot of the people that are interested in bringing me there is because of this applied work on basically data tools and AI tools for governments, you know, because that's what a lot of people are like really thinking about. When you talk to like the real technocrats that are running the stuff, you know, they're super desperate for things like this because there's a lot of decisions that are made like this still, you know, by trying to guess things or use the information that they receive through other channels of communication. You know, like when you try to measure the wind like this? Yeah. So I think there is a hunger for this tool, especially among the professional public servants. You know, politicians I would put separate, you know, but there's people that work 15, 20 years in governments and they're trying to get stuff done every year a little bit better. And I know examples of things that has happened like ingrown that they do, for example, in all that it is fiscalization, you know, like an enforcement. There is efforts that I've learned about AI, you know, for example, like to enforce labor laws, you know. I know people like in Chile have been doing SVMs to predict what's the probability that a firm would be a violator of a labor law, so then they can schedule inspections in a way that is more targeted, you know, and basically reduce the number of non-infractors that get inspected and increase the probability that an infractor gets inspected. So there are these, but you don't know unless you kind of like go and you talk to this guy that is kind of like medium level that is tasked to do that, because the politicians don't know kind of like sometimes how the things get done. They say there is the law that eventually has to say that people has to get inspected because of the labor law. How do you send inspectors? You know, that is a lot of discretion of like the technocrat that is implementing stuff in the executive power. You know, and I think that's where a lot of the innovation is going to happen, within that small window of liberty that you have in those executive power implementation decisions. Yeah. Yes?
It's hard to cut such an exciting discussion. We're going to wrap up with the 2 last questions.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, César. This is really a wonderful cumulative research program on complexity economics and related variety. I think there are not many research programs that make so much progress. So this is really nice. The bad thing is it's rather conservative if you look in the future. So it uses measures of relatedness that have been revealed, so combinations that have already been made, and it uses measure of welfare, so GNP, income, that we all know are perhaps not the most perfect, and even, let's say, for OECD countries, there's this Easterlin paradox, we don't need to go beyond particular income levels to increase happiness. So a way forward might be to look at societal challenges that go beyond GDP, so climate change, health, other ones, which are not that easy to capture in, let's say, statistical variables, although there is a lot of statistics on that, so there might be an AI and big data input into that. And we need combinations of resources, expertise that have not yet been made, so that have not been revealed. So how would your program enable a challenge that is not easily captured in traditional economic variables as a dependent variable? And how would it stimulate new combinations that have not yet been made, so that cannot be tackled with revealed relatedness measures?
Yeah. So like in some way, like the reason why I use GDP and growth and all of those things, because in some way, if you want to kind of like try to go there, you have to show to the people that are here that you're not deviating too much, you know, so that you become accepted and you're not labeled a hack right away. You know, but if you think about it, what I'm kind of like trying to push is like, it's not GDP, but what I'm trying to push is the ACI, which will be like a measure, let's say, of, you know, GDK, like gross domestic knowledge, okay? And that in some sense, like what I'm trying to focus more and more is on the knowledge that is accumulated in locations and how that changes over time, which will be the process of learning and all of these diffusion processes that help us understand that, you know? Because ultimately, I think that, you know, that knowledge intensity is the one that allows you to solve these different societal challenges, whether these are like health challenges or whether, you know, these are sustainability challenges and so forth. Like knowledge is the one that is transformative, that expresses in...
A plea for moving from GDP or income to useful knowledge?
Yeah, to like a gross domestic knowledge, so like, yeah.
But still, there's no direction in that, so how can you...
What do you mean by no direction? Yeah.
Well, what is useful knowledge to one person might not be useful to others. And if we have grand societal challenges, you would like to have somewhat more useful knowledge being devoted toward that attractor, so to say.
No, but like the useful knowledge is the one that actually has a practical use, you know, that is enhancing of different dimensions. So if it's, let's say, medical knowledge is useful as long as it helps save lives, it helps make, you know, like the health of people better and so forth, yeah? In each one of the domains, you know, the knowledge has its sort of utility functions that you can think of. Yeah, but at the end of the day, it is kind of like like some sort of common denominator, even though knowledge is very diverse in itself, you know, that could be redeployable and useful for many different domains. So to me,
knowledge production functions within many different domains then.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So like at the end, like what you want to have is the best group of people with the best knowledge on the topic doing the stuff that they need to do, you know. So like if you're trying to maximize like the quality of the knowledge in a social context for every group, if you are the most knowledgeable city in the world, you know, basically you are exporting like crazy, you have like people wanting to come to where you are, you probably have a lot of things, you know, that are positive going on. So I don't think you can have like a universal function that satisfies everything, you know, but if there's something that I would shoot for as some sort of easy criteria to define, you know, like policy and what we want to shoot for, is I want to shoot for policies that maximize learning, because my objective function definitely is like social knowledge. Yeah. So if I have a society that is always learning, it's always going to be able to adapt and evolve and find new solutions and so forth. Yeah. So learning is my objective function.
All right, very last question.
Yeah, I wanted to add to the to this earlier question about responsibility, because he talked about people that do an analysis that do not fully comprehend this analysis, but what you said before was already that a bad analysis can be bad, but bad data can be more problematic. And no data is perfect. There is now a lot of books about weapons of mass destruction and all this kind of stuff, that there is sort of biases in social data. How do you show this information to the people that use your site? For example, like if we look at one thing that I can imagine that might be interesting in this data is criminality records of regions. But poorer regions, police patrols more and therefore finds more of the criminality. And so there is a subtle bias within this data. How can you communicate these kind of biases to people that use
So they're different. This is difference in editorial lines, because for example in a site like Data USA, you know, like what our editorial line is like, we are distributors of data and tools. We're not sources of data. Okay? So like in that case, I either like if the government is telling me, you know, on their official statistics that this place has this level of crime and that this place has this income and that this fraction of the population is female and male, I'm just going to report that, because my goal as a platform is to tell you what is the official government data that they're using to make decisions themselves, and that's my editorial line. Now I could have another resource and I would separate the resource that has a different editorial line that its goal is to audit the quality of the data and try to claim back. But I would try not to mix that, you know, because the moment, you know, that you have a site that its goal is to criticize the quality and the biases of the data, the moment that you close the doors to that data itself and you put yourself in an antagonistic relationship, you know. So I think you need all of those functions, but you need to be clever about how to separate them. You know, the data distribution function is separate than the data audit function, and you know, you want to have like loops that, hey, if the data auditing results in changes in the data collection effort, then the data distribution is going to get the new data that was collected and is going to distribute that. You know, but I separate those functions, you know, editorially. Yeah.
But in the original side of USA, probably you have the survey and the results, and immediately next to that the PDF file with what was the sample size, what were the possible biases and stuff like that. So then it's very easy for people that look for this kind of data to also see what are the possible biases and the shortcomings. And I
like you would imagine that like government data doesn't come like that well documented and organized and everything, like when you work with government data, like finding like what was the sample size and where the random was, like it takes like days of like digging through click holes that take you nowhere. So it is like even just getting like the number out with little documentation, it's quite tough, you know. Yeah, unfortunately, but that's the way it is. So like what we're trying to do is to improve that pipeline, but working in a way like, hey, you know, if we make it a little bit better, you know, that's an improvement, and as long as the derivative is in the right direction, you know, yeah, it's what we can contribute. I wish that yes, you could click on anything and you would know exactly you know, like where the data was coming from, who was collected, who was the public sector worker responsible of that survey, but yeah.
But even so, you're creating more distance between the fact and...
No, less distance, yeah.
All right.
Because the distance that you have right now is the same web without Data USA.
Okay, so let's close now the seminar and please join me again in thanking César.